My mother-in-law smiled at my daughter, then pulled her hand back and said, "Oh no, not you, Emily. Maybe next time, if you behave better." No gift, no bracelet, just a cold dismissal in a room full of kids flashing gold. My 7-year-old Emily looked up at me, clutching her bunny, whispering, "Mommy, did I do something bad?" That was the moment my blood turned to fire. I almost walked out, but what happened next changed everything. Before I tell you how my husband shattered decades of silence, that day hit like, and tell me in the comments if you've ever watched someone you love be treated like they don't belong. Your words remind me I'm not alone. I'm Claire Thompson, 34, and for most of my life I thought I'd married into a picture-perfect family. My husband Mark works in construction management, steady, reliable, the kind of man who never leaves a project unfinished. I work in an office downtown, juggling spreadsheets by day and bedtime stories by night. Together we raise Emily, our 7-year-old, the brightest little soul I know. She has big brown eyes that always search for approval and a laugh that used to fill every corner of our house. But when it comes to family gatherings, nothing ever feels simple. Mark's mother runs them like she's the queen of some private kingdom. The big old house she lives in, the one with the creaky porch and the chandelier that hums when the air conditioner kicks on, becomes her stage. Every holiday, every so-called special gathering, it's the same ritual. She cooks up enough food to feed 3 churches lines the table with trays of cupcakes from Walmart, dressed up on her own china plates, and calls in all the cousins, nieces, and nephews like she's about to hand down a royal decree. At first, I thought these parties were harmless, even sweet, a family that cared enough to come together right. But underneath the laughter and the smell of baked ham, there was always that tension. The quiet measuring of who got what, who sat closest to Grandma, who was worth showing off. And the truth, Emily and I were always on the outside of that circle. Mark would squeeze my hand under the table, that silent warning that said, "Just play along." He grew up in this house, he knew the rules. His mother adored certain grandchildren, the ones who mirrored her pride or carried her name. The rest were tolerated. You could see it in the way she bent down to hug one child, then gave another a distracted pat on the head. Still, Emily never noticed. Not until this year. She was finally old enough to sense that being part of Grandma's special club meant more than a hug at the door. It meant inclusion, belonging. And when my mother-in-law sent out the invitations for this latest gathering, she didn't call it a party. She called it a surprise for all the grandchildren. Those words alone were enough to light Emily up for weeks. She'd come home from school talking about what it might be, maybe matching necklaces, maybe toys, maybe a secret adventure. And I let myself hope too. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe this family would prove me wrong. The day of the gathering felt like it had been circled on the calendar in red. Sunlight poured through the lace curtains in my mother-in-law's living room, catching on the framed photos of smiling grandkids lined up on her mantel. Every detail screamed of celebration balloons tied to the porch rail trays of food spread across the long oak table. Little cousins darting through the hall with their phones already recording. I held Emily's hand as we stepped inside. She was practically bouncing, her stuffed bunny tucked under her arm ears, frayed from years of love. "Do you think it's a puppy? Mommy?" she whispered, eyes wide. I laughed, even though the knot in my stomach told me better. Mark stood close, his jaw already tight. I could feel his discomfort without him saying a word. He knew better than anyone how quickly these parties turned from warm to cruel. He'd lived it as a boy, being the one overlooked, the one who watched other kids unwrapping shiny things, while he pretended not to care. Still, we stayed. That's what you do. When it's family, you sit on couches that aren't yours, you smile politely, and you pray no one notices the cracks. My mother-in-law entered like a performer making her grand debut. She carried a stack of small velvet boxes in her arms, each one identical and perfect. Gasps spread across the room. The whispers started, bracelets, maybe jewelry. The cousins leaned forward, eyes sparkling. Phones lifted higher. She opened the first box and handed it to my nephew, a delicate gold bracelet with his initials engraved. So precious, she cooed, kissing his cheek. Another box, another bracelet, another round of squeals. The line of children seemed endless, each one walking away with their prize, their place secured. I felt Emily's grip on my arm tighten. She sat up straighter, pressing her bunny against her chest, waiting. Her turn was coming. She believed it with all her heart, and that's when it happened. My mother-in-law reached the last box. She paused, glanced at Emily, then pulled her hand back as if the gift itself might burn her. Her smile turned sharp. "Oh no, not you, Emily. Maybe next time, if you behave better." The words sliced through the air, cameras lowered. The kids shifted uneasily. Emily's lips parted, trembling. She looked at me, eyes brimming, and whispered so soft it broke me in half. "Mommy, did I do something bad?" That was the turning point. My blood surged hot. I wanted to grab her hand to march us out the door and slam it behind us. But Mark caught my arm before I could rise. His voice was low, controlled, but it carried a weight I'd never heard before. "Wait," he whispered. "Just wait." The chatter around us stumbled forward, forced and hollow. Parents murmured, trying to distract their kids. But the air in that room had changed. I could feel it. Mark disappeared up the stairs, leaving me clutching Emily, my heart hammering. I didn't know what he was planning, but I knew one thing: this was no longer just a family gathering. Something was about to break wide open. I sat frozen on that sofa, Emily pressed into my side like she was trying to disappear into me. The bracelet boxes were gone now, dangling from the wrists of every other child in the room. Their parents forced smiles, snapping pictures with stiff voices, pretending everything was still festive. But no one looked at us. No one dared. Emily's little fingers dug into my arm. Her stuffed bunny's worn ears brushed against my elbow. She hadn't spoken another word since whispering that question. Did I do something bad? My chest felt crushed under the weight of it. I wanted to stand, to grab her hand, walk out of that house, slam the door behind us, and never look back. I shifted forward, ready to move, when Mark's hand caught my wrist. "Wait," he whispered, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Mark." I started, but his eyes locked on mine with an intensity that stopped me cold. I saw something there I hadn't seen in years. Not resignation, not fear, but resolve. He stood up slowly, shoulders squared, fists still clenched. Without another word, he turned and walked toward the staircase. The room barely noticed my mother-in-law was fussing over the cousins, adjusting bracelets, demanding they hold up their wrists for photos. The adults murmured shallow compliments. Laughter rose and died in the same breath. But I noticed. I tracked every step Mark took up those stairs, my heart hammering so loud I thought people might hear it. 10 long minutes passed, 10 minutes of me sitting stiff on that sofa, Emily's cheek buried in my side, my throat burning from unshed tears. Every second stretched like an hour. Around us, the party clattered forward, but the air felt poisoned heavy. Even the chandelier's faint hum seemed louder than the fake laughter. Then I heard it: footsteps, deliberate, slow. Mark appeared at the top of the staircase, a small wooden box in his hands. Not flashy, not decorated, just plain dark wood worn at the corners. I had never seen it before. His face gave nothing away, but the energy rolling off him was undeniable. Conversations faltered as he descended. Phones lowered. Even the children went still, their new bracelets forgotten. My mother-in-law finally turned, eyes narrowing at the sight of her son carrying that box. He didn't look at anyone else. He walked straight to her, his steps steady, his grip firm around the box. "Mom," he said, his voice low but cutting through the silence like thunder, "do you remember Dad's pocket watch?" Her expression flickered just for a second. Of course. Why, Mark didn't answer her. Not yet. He set the box on the coffee table, opened the lid, and inside lay a gleaming gold watch. The very one his father had worn every single day until the day he died. Gasps rippled through the room. I covered my mouth, Emily lifting her head to see. Mark's voice was steady, but I caught the crack beneath it. Dad gave this to me before he passed. He told me to give it to someone who deserves it, someone who understands family, and then he turned. Not to me, not to his mother, to Emily. Her eyes widened, lips parting in disbelief. For me, she whispered. Mark knelt down right there in front of everyone. Yes, sweetheart. For you, because you do deserve it, because you are part of this family, because no one will ever make you feel like you're not. Tears spilled down her cheeks. My own vision blurred. The room had gone silent, but it was the kind of silence that trembles before it breaks, and I knew the counterattack had begun. Mark's words didn't just hang in the air, they detonated. The room that had been buzzing with shallow laughter now sat hollow, every eye glued to him, on one knee in front of Emily. My daughter's tiny hands trembled as she clutched the watch like it was made of starlight. Across the room, my mother-in-law's face hardened. She forced a brittle smile, the kind you paste on when the mask is slipping. Mark, she said, voice tight. That's not appropriate. It's an heirloom. It's meant for someone who understands family. Mark cut in, his voice rising above hers. He stood slowly towering over her, the wooden box still open on the table, the truth gleaming inside it. Dad trusted me to decide, and I just did. Gasps fluttered again. My sister-in-law's phone, halfway lifted to snap a picture, froze mid-air. The cousins shifted uneasily, bracelets jangling. I felt my breath catch. For years, Mark had bitten his tongue at these gatherings, letting his mother orchestrate her pageants of favoritism, never once stepping out of line. But this time he was done. His mother's eyes darted around, searching for support. "You're overreacting," she hissed, the smile dropping. "It was just a playful moment. Emily will get something next time." Emily's shoulders slumped, her small voice breaking. "But Grandma, why not me this time?" Every adult winced. The words of a child had done what none of us dared, shoved the cruelty into the light. Mark's fists tightened. "Don't you dare put that weight on her shoulders. She's 7 years old. She's not here to earn your approval like some contestant. She's your granddaughter, and she deserves love, not conditions." My mother-in-law straightened her chin, lifting with the old arrogance. "Don't lecture me about family, Mark. I built this house. I held this family together after your father died. I decide what tradition looks like." Mark stepped closer, his voice low but thunderous. "Tradition is humiliation. A tradition is shaming children until they break part of the legacy you're so proud of." Her mouth opened, but no words came. The silence stretched. Then my brother-in-law, shifting awkwardly near the fireplace, spoke for the first time. "Mom, that was pretty harsh. You shouldn't have said that to Emily. It was like a crack in a dam." My sister-in-law stepped forward, her hand resting gently on Emily's shoulder. "That's a beautiful watch, sweetheart," she said softly. "You deserve it." One cousin lowered his bracelet, suddenly less eager to flaunt it. Another kid murmured, "Why didn't Grandma give her one too?" Parents exchanged uneasy looks, the perfect facade collapsing piece by piece. Mark turned back to his mother, his voice steady, now controlled. "This ends here. You will not make my daughter feel like she's less than. Not in this house. Not anywhere." Her lips trembled, the confidence draining. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked small. "I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did," Mark said sharply, cutting her off. His words landed like a hammer. "You've meant it for years. You did it to me, and now you tried to do it to her." The air shifted again. My chest tightened, realizing what he'd just confessed. He wasn't only standing up for Emily, he was facing his own ghosts. Emily looked up at him, eyes wide. "Daddy, she hurt you too." Mark knelt again this time, not with the watch, but with his truth. His voice cracked raw. "Yeah, baby, she did. She made me feel like I didn't matter. But I promised myself, if I ever had a child, I'd never let it happen again. And today, I kept that promise." The room went deathly quiet. Even the chandelier seemed to stop humming. My mother-in-law's hands shook as she clutched the armrest of her chair. Her power, built on years of control and selective affection, was unraveling in front of everyone. Finally, she whispered almost to herself, "I was just trying to be fair." Fairmark's laugh was bitter. "You lined up children like trophies, handed out gold like a game show host, and then told a 7-year-old she wasn't worthy. That's not fairness. That's cruelty dressed up as tradition. No one defended her. Not this time." Emily's tears slowed her tiny fingers running over the smooth curve of the watch. She leaned against Mark, whispering, "Thank you, Daddy." I swallowed hard, blinking through my own tears. This wasn't just about a bracelet. It was about generations of silence shattering in one night. Mark stood tall, his arm around Emily. "We're leaving," he said firmly. "And when you think back on tonight, remember this love isn't a prize you dangle in front of children. It's what you give freely, or it means nothing at all." We moved toward the door. My heels clicked against the hardwood, the sound echoing through the stunned room. My mother-in-law remained seated, her eyes glossy, her lips pressed into a thin, defeated line. Behind us, murmurs rose, hushed voices, nervous glances, people finally acknowledging what they'd all seen but never spoken. The screen door creaked as we stepped onto the porch. The summer night air wrapped around us, cool and liberating. Emily clutched the watch, holding it to her chest like a shield. Mark's hand found mine, squeezing tight. And for the first time in years, I felt it too, the weight of the cycle breaking. The car ride home was quiet, the kind of silence that settles after a storm. Emily sat in the back seat, her head tilted against the window, the gold watch cradled in her hands. The streetlights flickered across her sleeping face, catching on the tear tracks that had finally dried. Mark drove with both hands gripping the wheel, his knuckles pale. I could see the tension in his jaw, the way his chest rose and fell too quickly. Finally, he exhaled. "I couldn't let her go through it, Claire. Not what I went through. Not again." I reached across the console, resting my hand on his arm. "You didn't just protect her," I whispered. "You protected the boy you used to be." He glanced at me, eyes wet. For the first time, I understood the depth of his silence. All those years, the dinners where he barely spoke, the gatherings he dreaded. Tonight wasn't only about Emily. It was about ending something that had haunted him his whole life. When we carried Emily inside, she stirred just enough to murmur, "Daddy's watch. Makes me feel like a princess." Mark bent down, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "You're more than a princess. You're loved." Downstairs, Mark sat at the kitchen table, his head in his hands. I touched his shoulder, and he looked up at me with eyes full of exhaustion and relief. "We broke it," he said softly. "The cycle's over." And in that moment, I knew he was right. Emily hadn't just inherited a watch, she'd inherited proof that she mattered. And that love, real love, doesn't skip anyone. Family isn't measured in heirlooms or gold bracelets. It's measured in who stands up when it matters most. That night, my daughter didn't just walk away with a pocket watch, she walked away knowing she was worth fighting for. And Mark, he finally silenced the voice that had told him since childhood he wasn't enough. If you've ever seen someone you love treated as less than, you know how deep the scars can run. But you also know the power of saying enough. If this story hit you, share it in the comments, subscribe, and stick around because the next story might be the one you need.
My name is Nora Bennett, and I am 34 years old. If anyone asks me how my marriage ended, they usually expect fireworks screaming shattered glass, some tragic grand finale. But that's not my story. My story ended quietly, like glass cracking under velvet. No noise. Just the slow realization that everything I built was being taken apart in silence. For 7 years, I thought I was the anchor of my marriage. I handled everything practical, the unglamorous tasks that kept life steady. Spreadsheets, insurance claims, mortgage payments, even fixing the dripping kitchen faucet at midnight when my husband Edward had declared he was too drained spiritually to deal with low-vibration tasks. I worked in corporate finance, not glamorous, not exciting, but solid, reliable. My salary gave Edward freedom. It allowed him to leave his corporate job and chase what he called his soul work wellness coaching. I paid the bills, the rent, and the retreats that cost thousands. And for a long time, I convinced myself that supporting his dream was just another form of love. At first, his passion seemed harmless. He lit candles in the living room, played soft gongs on YouTube, and spoke about alignment. I humored him. I thought it was a phase, like people who join book clubs but never finish a novel. But slowly the vocabulary took over. He came home from a manifestation retreat glowing, telling me I was too grounded. Too logical, he said with a sigh. You lack fire. You don't understand the universe isn't about numbers and schedules. I wanted to scream, do you know who pays for your universe? But I didn't. I kept quiet. I reminded myself. Marriages survive differences. Love adapts. And yet, the gap between us grew wider. The more I stabilized, the more he floated. I watched him drift further away, his eyes shining whenever he mentioned her name, Lila. She was a guest speaker at one of his retreats, a woman with a mane of dark hair, silk scarves, and a voice that slid through every room like honey. She wasn't just a mentor, she was his new frequency. At first, I thought she was just another guide. Edward always surrounded himself with these gurus who promised enlightenment in exchange for fees that looked suspiciously like rent money. But there was something about the way his voice softened when he said her name. Something about how he lingered on her every phrase. Lila says this. Lila believes that. It was the way he stopped looking at me and started quoting her instead. The betrayal wasn't loud. It wasn't explosive. It was a shadow creeping across the wall of my marriage, blotting out the light 1 inch at a time. The moment I knew was one rainy Tuesday. Edward was gone for another 5-day soul retreat. I was alone in our house, the silence pressing against my ears. I decided to deep clean the home office, the one he had claimed for his energy work. Books about vibrations and abundance were stacked in messy towers. Journals filled with half-scribbled affirmations spilled across the desk. And then I saw it. A phone. Not his iPhone, which he carried everywhere like a second limb. This was a cheap burner phone tucked beneath a pile of glitter-covered self-help notebooks. I froze. Why would he need another phone? He said once it was to separate clients from his personal life. But if that were true, why hide it? Why bury it beneath journals like a buried bone? My hand hovered. My heart didn't race. It stopped. I picked it up. The battery was low, but when I pressed the power button, the screen lit up. Notifications flooded the lock screen from an encrypted messaging app. Dozens. Hundreds. I shouldn't have known the password. But I did. Because Edward, the man who believed in cosmic secrets, wasn't clever with earthly ones. His passcode was the same as always, 11. When the screen opened, I saw the name instantly. Lila. I tapped, and the messages unfolded like a confession written in neon lights. Edward, Nora doesn't understand the fire inside me. She makes life too heavy, too practical. She thinks our future is just mortgages and retirement funds. You see me. You understand the frequency I vibrate on. Lila. You're an incredible man, Edward. Anchors are for ships that never want to sail. You're meant for oceans. Don't let her chain you to the dock. Edward. Sometimes I feel guilty. She's always supported me, paid for everything. But it feels like the universe is pulling me toward you. Lila, guilt is a prison. Alignment is freedom. This isn't cheating. This is soul destiny. We were brought together by divine timing. I stared at the words until the letters blurred. Not cheating. Soul destiny. They weren't just betraying me, they were rewriting the dictionary to justify it. And yet I didn't cry. I didn't scream. The world didn't tilt. It went perfectly still. I placed the phone back down on the desk. My breath came out in one long, steady exhale. That was the moment the marriage ended. Not with a fight, not with a revelation shouted across the room, but with a text message lit up on a cheap screen telling me I was an anchor to a man who wanted to drown in illusions. I stood there in silence, my fingers pressed to the desk. I thought about the years of planning the sacrifices the money poured into retreats, and I felt something colder than grief. Resolve. Edward had just handed me the one thing I needed: evidence, not only of betrayal, but of the arrogance to believe betrayal was holy. And I decided right then that my ending wouldn't be loud. It would be precise. It would be final. The next morning, I woke up with a strange kind of clarity. Not peace, that word belonged to people who still believed. What I felt was more like the sharp edge of a blade, cold, steady, dangerous. I went back to the office and picked up the burner phone again. It was still there, sitting exactly where I had left it on the desk, as if mocking me. a black plastic box filled with truths I hadn't wanted to see. I unlocked it, and this time I didn't just skim. I read everything, every line, every excuse. The conversation stretched back months. Nora is practical, but she makes me feel small. She wants a future of retirement funds and mortgages. I want a future of expansion of cosmic fire. Lila, you're outgrowing her. Anchors can't understand wings. You need someone who lifts you, not someone who chains you to the earth. Edward. She doesn't get it. She thinks I'm irresponsible. But you see the greatness in me. Lila. That's because you're destined. When the universe speaks, you follow. Don't confuse her safety with love. I scrolled further, my fingers numb, my breath steady. Edward, I feel guilty sometimes. She's given me everything. She supports me financially. Without her, I wouldn't be able to... Lila, stop. Guilt is a cage. This isn't cheating. This is alignment. It's soul destiny. You and I were always meant to find each other. That line, that was the knife. This isn't cheating. It's soul destiny. I could almost hear Lila's voice dripping into my ears, wrapping Edward in velvet lies. And he believed it. He swallowed it whole because it was easier to be told he was a chosen man than to admit he was just a husband being unfaithful. I put the phone down. I didn't rage. I didn't sob. I didn't even smash the phone like some melodramatic heroine in a movie. Instead, I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and created a spreadsheet. Because this wasn't just betrayal. This was business, and I was going to execute the exit like a professional merger termination. I started with money. All the accounts, all the investments, all the assets that were undeniably mine before the marriage. I listed them. Color-coded. Red for shared. Blue for mine. I called my bank, moved the liquid assets into a private account. I called my lawyer Frank, a man I trusted because he spoke in terms of facts and contracts, not energy and alignment. I told him to draft an uncontested divorce petition citing irreconcilable differences. Do you want to pursue infidelity claims, he asked. No, I said. That requires noise. I want silence. He hesitated but then nodded. Understood. We'll secure everything on your side first. He can fight, but he won't win. By the time I closed my laptop that night, my life had shifted. I was no longer a wife protecting her marriage. I was a strategist preparing her exit. 2 days later, I stood in our kitchen, staring at the man I once thought I'd grow old with. Edward had just returned from his retreat. He walked in with that same smug, blissful expression, radiating self-satisfaction. His skin still glowed from the spa oils, his hair tied back with a silk scarf that Lila had probably gifted him. He set down his leather satchel and smiled at me. Nora, he said, his tone indulgent, like he was the enlightened one and I was the child. You feel heavy today. What's wrong? Your energy is all... He waved his hands vaguely in front of him. Stagnant. I didn't answer. I just looked at him. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel the urge to fix, to soothe, to balance. I only felt the sharp blade of knowledge pressed against the fabric of our lives. Edward. I said, my voice steady, almost gentle. How was your retreat? His smile widened. Transformational. Lila and I cut him off. Yes, I read about it. The color drained just slightly from his face. Read about what? I picked up the burner phone from the counter. His eyes widened, panic flickering before he masked it with false serenity. That's private, he said sharply. That's sacred, Nora. You violated my privacy. No, I said, sliding the phone across the counter toward him. You violated our marriage. He scoffed, forced a laugh. You don't understand. This isn't what you think it is. Lila and I, what we have, it's not infidelity. It's alignment. It's spiritual destiny. I tilted my head. The words you wrote were, this isn't cheating. It's soul destiny. Silence. For once his smug grin cracked. But even then, he tried to regain control. Nora, you're clinging to old paradigms, marriage contracts, legalities. Those are cages. The universe doesn't operate in cages. You're too logical to see what's happening. I'm not leaving you for her. I'm leaving you for my higher self. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was pathetic. I walked to the counter, picked up a manila envelope, and placed it in front of him. Inside are divorce papers. The division of assets is already outlined. Since your texts demonstrate financial and emotional misconduct, the settlement is heavily in my favor. My lawyer, Frank, is copied on everything. His face finally shifted from smugness to panic. You can't be serious, he said, voice rising. You're punishing me for choosing growth, for choosing love. No, I said calmly. I'm protecting my investments. I slid the spare house key across the marble counter. You can contact Frank if you disagree. The movers will be here tomorrow to take my things. I'm gone. I picked up my briefcase. His voice cracked behind me as he shouted, "You're making a mistake. You'll regret this. You'll be alone. Nora, you'll—" I closed the door behind me before he could finish. And for the first time in years, the silence felt like freedom. The next evening, I came home earlier than usual. I wanted to see it in his eyes, the exact moment Edward realized the life he'd carelessly tossed aside was already gone. The house felt sterile, unnaturally quiet. I had packed my essentials the night before and moved them into my sister Claire's guest room. Only a suitcase of clothes remained in our bedroom. I left the rest deliberately, the tidy furniture, the framed photos, the perfectly organized kitchen drawers. It wasn't a home anymore. It was a stage. And tonight, Edward would walk onto it, unaware his role had already been written out of the script. When the front door opened, I was standing in the middle of the living room with my briefcase in hand. He froze for a fraction of a second, then composed himself with that irritating false calm he always put on after a retreat. "Nora," he said, smiling like I was the lost child. "I was just about to text Lila. We had such a profound conversation this morning about rebirth," she says. I interrupted. My voice was quiet, controlled. I filed for divorce. The smile didn't falter. It hardened, became brittle. He tossed his tote bag onto the sofa and crossed his arms, tilting his head like I was the irrational one. "Nora," he sighed, "you're making this heavier than it needs to be. The universe wants me to expand. You're clinging to outdated structures. Look, I knew we'd have to talk about our paths diverging, but it doesn't have to be hostile. We can separate with compassion." I didn't blink. Compassion. You mean like the compassion you showed when you texted Lila that I was an anchor chained to the dock while you were meant for oceans? His eyes darted, just for a second. Then he smirked. "You went through my phone. I saw everything I said flatly. The guilt you pretended to feel. The way she told you it wasn't cheating if it was soul destiny. I stepped closer, my voice cutting sharper. The way you let her recast betrayal as some kind of cosmic gift." He shook his head, the smirk returning. "You don't understand the level of connection Lila and I have. You never did. You're too rational, too stuck in numbers and logic. You don't believe in divine contracts, so of course you can't see it. This marriage had completed its cycle. That's not betrayal, that's truth." I opened the envelope I had been holding and slid the papers across the counter. The sound of the manila scraping against marble was louder than his words. "I don't subscribe to cosmic contracts, Edward." I said, my tone calm, absolute. "I only recognize legal ones. These are the divorce documents. The division of assets is already filed with the court. Everything I had before the marriage is protected. You don't get to feed off me anymore." For the first time, his serenity cracked. His hands twitched as he opened the envelope, scanning the papers. His voice rose shaky, breaking through the calm guru facade. "You can't do this. You're punishing me for finding myself, for living authentically." I tilted my head, watching him unravel. "No, Edward. I'm managing the risk of a bad investment." He slammed the papers back onto the counter. 7 years, Nora. 7 years. You're just going to erase because of some texts. You're destroying my future, our future over semantics. Our future, I let the words hang in the air heavy. No, Edward. You destroyed that the moment you chose her validation over my loyalty. You didn't want a wife. You wanted a fan club. And I'm not going to clap while you set fire to everything we built. He stepped closer, his eyes wide with desperation now. "You're too cold. You don't feel. That's your problem, Nora. You think life is just spreadsheets and strategies. No wonder you can't connect." I met his gaze unflinching. "Cold, maybe. But at least cold is stable. You wanted fire. Now you can burn with it. Alone." I placed the house key on the counter and turned to leave. Behind me, his voice cracked, rising in anger. "You'll regret this. You'll be alone, Nora. No one will love you the way I." I opened the door and stepped outside, letting it shut on his words. The night air hit my face like a baptism. For the first time in years, I could breathe. I didn't look back, not at the house, not at him. The marriage hadn't ended tonight. It had ended long ago with whispers of soul destiny typed into a secret phone. Tonight was just the paperwork. The signature on a contract I never wanted to sign, but one I had no choice but to enforce. And as I walked toward my car, I felt the strangest thing. Not grief, not anger. Relief. The morning after I walked out, the movers came. They carried my last few boxes and the suitcase I had left behind. Watching them strip the final traces of me from that house was oddly satisfying. No yelling, no chaos, just the steady removal of evidence like erasing pencil marks from a page. By the afternoon, Edward's home was nothing more than a hollow shell of what we once pretended was love. I didn't stay to watch him discover the emptiness. That wasn't my role anymore. I had already removed myself from the script. I moved into my sister Claire's guest room. Claire didn't ask for details. She saw the tight line of my mouth, the calm precision in my answers, and knew better than to press. She simply handed me a spare key, poured me a glass of wine, and let me sit in silence. That night, as I lay on her couch, the weight of my decision pressed against me, not in regret, but in realization. 7 years, gone in a week. And yet, I didn't feel broken. I felt lighter, as if Edward's endless demands had been pressing against my chest all along, and finally the air was mine again. No calls, no texts, no social media. I changed my number, my email. I instructed Claire not to give my new contact to anyone, no matter what sob story Edward might spin. I didn't tell my friends the truth either. I gave them the bare minimum. We're divorcing. It was irreconcilable. They wanted drama, but I refused to hand Edward my dignity by turning him into a story to gossip about. If he wanted to paint himself as the enlightened victim, let him. The silence would hurt more than any accusation I could throw at him. Work became my sanctuary. I poured myself into long nights of spreadsheets, compliance audits, and strategy meetings. My colleagues whispered that I looked sharper, more focused, more alive. They didn't know that every number I crunched was a meditation, every late night in the office a prayer. Edward had mocked me for living in numbers. Now numbers were what saved me. When an international compliance audit assignment opened up, I volunteered. It meant relocating to another city, away from every place Edward and I had touched together. Away from the house, the memories, the ghost of what I thought marriage was supposed to be. Claire worried. "Are you sure you're not running away?" she asked. I gave her a small, tired smile. "I'm not running. I'm clearing the slate." The new city greeted me with anonymity. No one knew Nora Bennett, the woman whose husband left her for a spiritual siren. They only knew Nora Bennett, corporate strategist, precise, reliable, indispensable. In that silence, I rebuilt myself. I ran in the mornings. I worked late into the nights. I bought a small apartment, minimalist and clean, where every object had a purpose. No clutter, no vision boards, no affirmation candles. Just me and the sound of my own breath. Sometimes in the evenings I thought of him. Edward. His voice saying, "Anchors are for ships that never want to sail." I would remember the glow in his eyes when he talked about Lila, the way he dismissed me, as though my devotion was an inconvenience. And I would ask myself, did I miss him? The answer always came back the same. I didn't miss him. I missed the version of myself who believed we were building something real. But the world has a way of balancing its books. And even as I was finding peace in my vanishing, Edward's carefully constructed illusion was beginning to unravel. The first hint came through Claire. She mentioned that a mutual acquaintance had seen Edward at a cafe, sitting alone, looking disheveled. Not glowing, not enlightened, just small. "Maybe he's realizing what he lost," Claire said cautiously. I shook my head. Edward doesn't realize, he rationalizes. But still, a part of me wondered what happens to a man who believes betrayal is destiny, when destiny turns its back on him. The answer was coming. And though I had promised myself not to care, I couldn't deny the quiet thrill in my chest at the thought of the universe, or maybe just justice, finally cashing in the debt Edward owed. Karma doesn't arrive with trumpets. It arrives quietly like a storm gathering on the horizon. By the time you notice the clouds, it's already too late to outrun it. For Edward, the storm began 6 months after I left. I heard the first crack of thunder through Claire. She called one night, her voice laced with barely hidden satisfaction. "Did you know she said that Lila was married?" I sat very still. No. To who? To a man named Victor, a corporate attorney. Not just any attorney, either one with connections. The kind of man who doesn't just file for divorce, he wages war. I let out a low laugh. Of course. Of course, Edward's soulmate already belonged to someone else. Claire lowered her voice. Apparently Victor found out everything. The texts, the retreats, even the money Edward funneled into their little adventures. And Victor isn't just angry, he's strategic. That was the first bolt of lightning. Weeks later, the rumors spread wider. Edward, the man who once gloated about walking away from soulless corporate life, had been working part-time as a consultant for a wellness-adjacent company. But when Victor presented evidence of misconduct expenses charged to the company that coincided with his retreat weekends with Lila, Edward wasn't asked to resign quietly. He was fired, publicly. The irony couldn't have been sharper. A man who once lectured me that I lacked spiritual vision was now branded untrustworthy, unethical. The word stung him more than any divorce paper I had ever filed. Lila, of course, didn't stand by him. The day after his dismissal, she vanished, deleted her accounts, ghosted him completely. Word was she had begged Victor for forgiveness, painting Edward as the manipulator, and Victor, whether out of love or calculation, redirected his rage solely at Edward. Edward had bet his entire existence on a woman who saw him as a pastime, and when the game ended, he was left with nothing. I didn't hear this directly from Edward. No, he didn't dare contact me yet. I pieced it together through whispers, through the odd social media update Claire forwarded reluctantly. Once she showed me a picture someone had posted of him sitting in a nearly empty cafe, his clothes wrinkled, his hair unkempt, no silk scarf in sight. He was hunched over a notebook, scribbling affirmations to no one. I looked at the photo for a long time, then I handed Claire's phone back without a word. His so-called wellness business collapsed almost overnight. Clients canceled, retreats were abandoned, and when Victor's circle spread the story that Edward had not only cheated, but tried to mask it as spiritual growth, his reputation imploded. Because there's one thing even believers can't forgive: hypocrisy. The same friends who once praised him for seeking alignment now whispered behind his back. Words like fraud and homewrecker clung to him like smoke. Meanwhile, I thrived. In my new city, I had been promoted to lead auditor on international compliance. My colleagues praised my precision, my calm under pressure. The same qualities Edward dismissed as cold now made me invaluable. The irony wasn't lost on me. He scorned the anchor, but it was the anchor who rose while he drowned. One night as I prepared notes for a high-stakes audit presentation, I caught myself thinking of him. Not with longing, not even with anger, just with a detached curiosity. What must it feel like, I wondered, to lose everything and still believe the universe owes you a happy ending? And then I realized Edward didn't believe in endings. He believed in stories, narratives where he was always the chosen one. But karma had no interest in his narrative. It was writing its own. The fall wasn't cinematic. There was no grand scene of Edward confessing his sins. It was quieter, crueler. The glow faded, the friends disappeared, the soulmate abandoned him. And all he had left was the echo of his own words. It's not cheating, it's soul destiny. Except now no one believed it, not even him. For me, it was closure without confrontation. I didn't have to slam doors or shout accusations. All I had to do was step back, and the universe, whether cosmic or simply logical, finished the work for me. And I couldn't deny it. There was a cold satisfaction in knowing that the man who once called me a burden was now carrying the weight of his own destruction. It started with an email. I was in the middle of preparing documents for a major compliance audit when my inbox pinged with a message from a throwaway account. The subject line was simple help. Against my better judgment, I clicked it. Nora. I know you probably hate me, but I'm in a desperate place. Lila left me with nothing. She was a manipulator, a narcissist, and I see that now. I should have listened to you. I should have stayed. I know I don't deserve it, but can you just give me advice? Not love. Not reconciliation, just financial advice. You were always so smart about money. Please, I'm drowning. I read it once, twice. My chest didn't tighten. My pulse didn't quicken. I archived it without replying. That night, as I brushed my teeth, I stared at myself in the mirror. For years, Edward's voice had filled my head, calling me too cold, too logical, too much of an anchor. And yet here he was begging for the very qualities he once mocked. The irony was almost laughable. 2 weeks later, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Claire's number. I answered, expecting her voice, but instead I heard someone else. Nora, darling, it's Margaret. Edward's mother. My stomach turned instantly. Margaret was a master of guilt, a woman who believed manipulation was the highest form of maternal love. Before I could speak, she launched in. I'm devastated about everything that's happened to my poor Edward. He's completely broken, Nora. He had to move back into my basement. Can you imagine my son living under my roof again at his age? It's humiliating. He needs you. You know him better than anyone. You could talk to him, help him find direction again. I stayed silent, gripping the phone tighter. Margaret continued, her voice dripping with faux concern. You can't just abandon a man after 7 years. A good wife, even an ex-wife, doesn't disappear when her husband is in crisis. You owe him closure. You owe him compassion. I finally spoke, my tone sharp and even. No, Margaret. I don't owe him anything. Edward abandoned me when life was comfortable. He had everything, and he chose betrayal. The only thing I owed him was a fair division of assets, which has been completed. That's it. There was a pause, then her voice hardened. You've always been so cold, Nora. Always so unfeeling. No wonder he strayed. I closed my eyes, letting the insult slide over me. Margaret, if you call this number again, I'll block it. Goodbye. And I hung up. But Margaret wasn't finished. A week later, Claire admitted reluctantly that Margaret had pressured her into giving Edward my new number. I'm sorry, Nora, Claire said. She cornered me. She made me feel like I was abandoning family. I shouldn't have, but I put a hand on her shoulder. Don't apologize. Manipulation is her native language. She would have found a way regardless. That night, my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I didn't answer. The voicemail that followed was Edward's voice, weak and shaking. Nora, it's me. I know you don't want to hear from me, but I don't know where else to turn. I can't get out of this hole. Everything fell apart. Lila, she destroyed me. I should have listened to you. Please, just tell me what to do. You're the only one who can. I listened, then deleted it. But the messages didn't stop. Emails, calls, even letters handwritten and left at Claire's door. Each one dripping with a strange mixture of self-pity and entitlement. You're cold, Nora, but you were always my balance. If you love me once, you can't just abandon me now. I know I was wrong, but the universe is punishing me. You're supposed to help me. You're supposed to be my anchor. I didn't reply. Because anchors aren't meant to save ships determined to sink. The more he begged, the colder my resolve became. I had spent 7 years holding him up, feeding his dreams, protecting his illusions, and when he chose someone else, he hadn't thought twice about discarding me. Now, as he sat in his mother's basement, broken and begging, I finally understood the truth. Edward never wanted a partner. He wanted a safety net, and I was done being that. By the time autumn came, the begging stopped sounding like begging. It turned sour, entitled. Ugly. The last attempt arrived on a Tuesday evening. I was reviewing documents in my apartment when my phone buzzed with another unknown number. I didn't answer. By now I never did. But this time he left a voicemail. When I pressed play, his voice filled the room. At first it was shaky, like a man on the edge of collapse. I know you're listening, Nora. You always listen. That's who you are, cold, silent, calculating. You think ignoring me makes you strong. It doesn't. It makes you a coward. I sat very still, letting the venom drip through the speaker. You disappeared, he continued, his words quickening, unraveling. You think you're better than me because you left first. You think you're untouchable now, hiding behind your spreadsheets and your audits. But you're not. You're nothing without me. You were never warm, never alive. Just a machine that managed bills. His voice cracked, fury spilling out. I was the one with fire. I was the one with passion. You're just cold. A miserable little woman who only knows numbers. That's why you'll always be alone. No one will ever love you because you don't know how to love. You just manage. You just control. There was a pause, his breathing ragged through the line. Then he spat the final words. You ruined my life, Nora. You took everything and left me with nothing. Don't you dare ignore me again. Call me back. We need to talk about the house. The irony was sharp enough to make me laugh. The house. The one sold months before the divorce finalized. He was clinging to ghosts, to contracts long dissolved, to a story that no longer existed. I replayed the message once, not out of pain, but out of clinical interest. That was the real Edward, not the glowing retreat participant, not the aligned man chasing destiny, just a furious, entitled voice blaming me for the ruin he built with his own hands. I saved the voicemail, not because I feared him, but because it was proof. Proof of who he had always been beneath the candles and chants. I didn't call him back. I didn't reply. Instead, I blocked the number, adding it to the growing list of attempts he'd made to claw his way back into relevance. Then I sat in the silence of my apartment, the city lights glowing faintly through the blinds, and felt an odd sense of finality. For months I had wondered if the story of Edward would ever truly close, if some tether still bound me to him through guilt or history. But listening to that voicemail, I realized the tether had snapped long ago. All that remained was an echo of anger from a man who could no longer reach me, and I was free. 9 months after the divorce papers were finalized, the world no longer whispered about Edward. It laughed. I didn't seek the news, but it found me anyway. Passed through colleagues, filtered through. Claire whispered like gossip over coffee. Edward's name had become a cautionary tale. The man who once lectured strangers about living in flow was now forced to sit under fluorescent lights giving mandatory corporate seminars on professional ethics. A cruel irony, the same company that fired him for misconduct had rehired him on contract not as a leader, but as a mascot of failure. He stood in front of rooms filled with interns and analysts repeating lines written by lawyers. Integrity is the foundation of trust. Align your choices with company values. The soulmate of destiny had been reduced to a cautionary slide deck. Meanwhile, my life was unrecognizable. I had been promoted, again director of auditing for the division. The work was gruelingly hours long, but it fed me in a way Edward never could. My colleagues respected me. My team relied on me. And for the first time in years, my achievements weren't dismissed as low vibration. They were celebrated as strength. In the mornings, I jogged through quiet streets, the city still half asleep. In the evenings, I cooked simple meals in my clean apartment where no one lit incense to hide the stench of lies. My silence was no longer emptiness, it was peace. One evening, I found myself standing by the window, looking out at the skyline, wineglass in hand. For the first time, I allowed myself to wonder, did I ever really love Edward? Or did I love the idea of who I thought he was? The truth cut sharp and clean. I had loved a dream, not the man. The dream of a partnership built on trust of two people lifting each other. That dream had never belonged to Edward. It had belonged to me. And now it belonged to no one, which meant I was free to rebuild it piece by piece without his shadow. Edward tried one last time months later. A mutual contact mentioned he had written a long social media post about resilience and rising from ashes. I didn't read it. I didn't need to, because I had already seen who he was in the cracked, furious voice on that voicemail, and no amount of spiritual jargon could rewrite the truth. He was a man who mistook entitlement for destiny. I was the woman who finally stopped carrying him. Did I feel pity? No. Did I feel triumph? Not exactly. What I felt was balance. The universe he had always claimed bends toward alignment. Maybe he was right, but alignment doesn't mean soulmates or destiny. It means truth finds its level like water in a glass. His truth was collapse, mine was freedom. I never replied to him. Not to the emails, the calls, the letters. I didn't send a single word. Because silence was the only language he couldn't twist. And as I closed my laptop that night, preparing for another international audit trip, I realized something with perfect clarity. The greatest revenge wasn't anger, it was erasure. Edward no longer existed in my life. He was a line item closed, a story finished, a ghost without power. And for the first time in years, the only voice I heard was my own.